Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Business Wingmen show. Today, we're going to deep dive the whole idea of what it means to be an exceptional project manager. Project management is apparent in a lot of different industries, a lot of different businesses, but I'm not sure that everybody always knows what it takes to be a successful project manager and what attributes you need to have so that the company looks at you as the best choice for that role. So, Travis, you've worked with project managers before. Maybe just for everybody's knowledge, what exactly does a project manager do? Why do you have a project manager versus just a manager of something else?
That's a great question. So not only have I worked with a lot of these people, I've had PMs or project managers directly reporting to me, and I've also been one many, many times. So a project manager, the best way to define that type of an individual is this person is overseeing a very specific project with people associated to that project, or it could be multiple projects. And they are kind of the wrangler and herder of cats, if you will. So they're responsible for everything from the actual resources associated with the work to the work itself. So how things get done, the timeframes and all that kind of fun stuff. So especially as it relates to technical work, project managers are very important because they're the people that kind of keep things moving forward, hopefully hitting your goals.
Okay, so if you're in a company and they need a project manager, maybe they don't have time to go out and recruit one, or they've just got to pick somebody from a group and elevate them. What is it that the leadership is looking for them to determine that this individual, if we elevate them to a project management status, that they've got the best chance of doing well in that?
So funny, just today I was out to lunch with a good colleague of mine, a guy by the name of Dan Rainey, and we were talking about this topic. Obviously, I'd mentioned we were going to be taping today, and one of the things that he brought up was how important good, fluid, and consistent communication is as it relates to being in this particular role. Because really, if you think about it, a project manager, whether they're on one large project or they're overseeing several projects, the biggest thing is for that individual to be able to communicate consistently across whatever channels that individual is working, and making sure that everybody has the same information moving forward. They know the plan, they know the attack, right? To not be able to do that, what that ends up doing is that causes confusion. People don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know what the timelines are and so forth. So I think at a bare minimum, if you're looking to potentially promote someone or put someone in a capacity of project management, they have to be able to communicate well. They have to be able to hold people accountable, right, to steer people, to guide people, to kind of be a coach at times, right?
Well, I would imagine that just maybe from even more of a basic level, you've got to have somebody who's really well organized, because Absolutely. Even if they're not doing it all, which they shouldn't be doing it all, they're going to have to kind of guide and, kind of be the ringmaster of everything that's going on, because it's not linear. That you may have multiple things going on kind of side by side, and somebody's got to make sure that those things don't crash or stop or anything like that.
Well, they're also very good at delegating. Most project managers are not doing the day-to-day tactical X and O's work. What they're doing is they're looking across, they're kind of pulling themselves up to maybe like a 1,000-foot level. And they're looking down at the departments, the different resources, the suppliers, right? They're involved within whatever body of work it is. And they are trying to execute that project through influence of those individuals, right? Or those organizations, corporations, what have you.
Right.
So organization 100% is important, because if you're not organized, what you're going to find is things are going to start falling through the cracks. And then that goes back to what we mentioned earlier. It's really hard to communicate when you're not organized.
Right.
You will become forgetful. All of a sudden, things start falling behind. So 100%.
All right. So back in my consumer products days, especially when I was with the Lysol company, there were times when, in fact, this happened all the time. All of the marketing departments were constantly thinking about and launching new products. Sometimes it was a single item, sometimes a whole line of things. And we never called, this is decades ago. So we never called them project managers. They were just the head person on that new launch project. So did project management as a defined job, did that start at some point? I mean, did that become a defined role that somebody would go and get hired for, as opposed to just, maybe changing the name, to better reflect what somebody was doing?
Well, the project management has been around, at least as far as I'm aware, since the late 80s. I mean, there are entire courses and books dedicated, for example, like PM Bach. You've also that book in of itself. I mean, it's probably 3 or 4 inches thick, of 500-600 pages dedicated to the art of project management. Most colleges, 4-year universities, offer, whether it's a certification or it's an actual degree in project management.
Okay.
So, for example, if someone does project management as a career, that's just what they do day in and day out.
Yes.
It's pretty common for that individual to hold a PMP certification. Project management professional is what it stands for.
Okay.
I know several people who have gone through that process. I mean, this is not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's perhaps not as robust as going and getting your legal degree by any means,
right.
But taking the bar. But the PMP certification and the test at the end is pretty robust. So this is not something you knock out over a weekend, right?
Right.
While you're sipping donuts and drinking orange juice, at some communal hall listening to a speaker.
All right. So you mentioned early on that you had been in project management. You were doing project management duties. What can you tell us about what you actually did in that role?
So the biggest thing at the beginning, and for maybe to make sure that I'm communicating correctly here. So my experience as a project manager has always been informal. I'm not formally trained as a PM. It's just something that I've had to learn along the way.
Okay.
And I would openly admit that there are still a variety of tasks within the PM kind of ethos, if you will, that I still don't do because I just don't know how to do it.
Okay.
So the formalized approach to being a PM, I mean, starts off with everything from project charters, which is you're going out and you're basically selling your case to the executives on why this project needs to occur, right? And then it goes into project planning, Gantt charts. Now you're using tools like Microsoft Project or Jira or Asana, right? So my background has not been the formal side of it. It's more been by necessity, which is we've got a body of work or we have people that are doing work, and someone needs to manage that to make sure that it gets to the end and gets to the end successfully.
Okay.
And so what I have done is I always start off by creating kind of a high level overview of what is this project, why are we doing it, and then what are kind of the KPIs, the key performance indicators that we need to be aware of. And then along the way, who are the stakeholders that need to be kept in the know, right? And so in its simplest terms, it's basically kind of a project Bible, if you will. Like it takes you step by step through what we need to do.
Right.
Everybody on the team has it.
Right.
And then what I'm doing as we're moving forward is I'm managing the project to those specificities, right? All right.
So you mentioned team. So if you're a project manager that's leading a team, who's on the team? How do those people get on that team, or are they just assigned there because they're already in the department?
Well, I'm sure most PMs that do this day in and day out would tell you that they would love to be able to assemble their own teams. Yeah, unfortunately, that's not the case most of the time.
Right.
Most of the time, the way I see it work, even in formal structures within a company where they have, for example, a PMO department, project management office, most of the time those PMs are coming in and they may be involved in the strategy, but they're not necessarily involved in the resource allocation side of it. So that can be pretty challenging. And you and I have actually talked about this prior, which is how do you come in as a leader with a team that already exists?
Yes.
And kind of get everybody stirred up and moving forward, right?
Right. Yes. So it sounds like that's kind of a similar role for a project manager. If if the team, let's say instead of trying to groom somebody from the inside, the company feels compelled to go and hire somebody from the outside. The team's already there. Now you have a new project manager taking over, right?
Correct.
All right.
And the other thing that a lot of PMs will experience in their career is when you're overseeing a project, it's almost like you have dotted line leadership responsibility. So for example, in our world in medical device on the engineering side of things, if there's an R&D project going on and a PM is over that project, inevitably there is some sort of a formal chain of command within R&D from a leadership perspective, whether that's an R&D manager, director, and then VP.
Okay.
So the balancing act for a PM then becomes, I've got to oversee this project, which means I'm overseeing resources that technically don't report to me, yet I've got to influence them and do it in a way that makes their boss happy.
Okay.
And that's a very interesting dynamic because you kind of have the power, but you kind of don't. And these people don't formally report to you.
Yes. All right. So you've also mentioned that you've overseen project managers. So the fact that you participated in that at some point and then got a chance to oversee people doing project management work for you, what kind of things did you spot in project managers that might have just been good but weren't exceptional in terms of what they should have or could have been doing to really make their role highly valuable?
I was so ready for you to ask that question. I've just been like waiting.
Yes, waiting.
Waiting. So I think most PMs, what they do well is, to your point earlier, they're organized. They can communicate. They may even know the technical ins and outs of doing the job, whether it's engineering or quality, whatever it is, right? Where I see them struggle is holding people accountable.
Oh.
So oftentimes what I see when, especially if it's a larger project that's going on, maybe you've got half a dozen resources or more, the PM they're trying to get someone in line or they're trying to get someone to finish a particular deliverable. They'll make 2 or 3 or 4 requests of that individual. And let's just say for whatever reason, the work isn't done. It's just almost like the PM just kind of gives up in that particular area and then moves on to something else. And the justification then becomes, well, I asked of that person 3-4 times, which, to be fair, I would find that annoying as hell myself.
Right.
But it's because they made the request, they have now justified in their head that they did their job and they're going to move forward, even though technically it's kind of hindering the project in a way. So the reason I bring that up is because where my role is today within our organization, because we have several project managers that are employed with our company, I'm holding them accountable for them to hold their teams accountable. And I know that sounds weird, but that's the area where I find people slipping is I'll be like, maybe I'm talking to John and I'm like, John, how come, we barely hit that deliverable? We could have had that work done 2 weeks ago. Why wasn't it done? Well, I asked so-and-so and so-and-so, and what do you end up finding out is they didn't escalate it and they didn't really get to a point of where they had to have a professional yet perhaps uncomfortable conversation.
Right. All right. So what I hear you saying is many times a project manager who's maybe generally good, they'll participate in their role. They'll get the basic things done. But in terms of taking real ownership for the outcome, they may not be quite there. That they're not vigorous enough about pushing the process and ensuring that things happen as opposed to going through the steps and hoping things happen.
Right. Well, it's like that time where it's like, well, hey, I did everything I could, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, okay, I saw you reached out 3 or 4 times, but what did you not do? Because at the end of the day, as a PM, you're ultimately responsible for the success of this project. So on my end, thankfully, I don't have to deal with this a lot, but if I see a situation where someone is not following through and I've now made 2 or 3 requests, I'm not making a request anymore. It's, you're going to get this done by this date or we're going to have a problem. And, perhaps not that direct,
right.
But it's, I am making it crystal clear that these are no longer requests.
Right.
And that's part of the problem, right? Is how do you deal with someone who's not really listening and kind of following up on your influence, right?
Well, I mean, all right. So if you run into somebody like that, that maybe they have a lot of the desired skills, but those essential skills, those things that can let you know that come hell or high water, this thing is getting done. They don't possess that. I mean, do you ever have a situation where you switch project managers in the middle of a project? I mean, has that ever happened?
It has, but I mean, gosh, you do not want to be in that situation.
Okay.
So for what it's worth, just in January last month, we did have that happen. Luckily, the person who I switched in the project was actually a better fit than the original person. But this project's been going on a little bit over a year now. We probably have another 4 or 5 months left to go. That's not really the time when you want to be switching out a PM.
Right.
You got an 18-month project and you're going to switch out the PM, 13 months into it. It's not ideal. Unfortunately, in our situation, the reason why we did the switch was because the original PM had to move and was moving back east, and it just wasn't possible. So
right.
we didn't have a choice.
Right.
But even in there, that whole transition is really dicey because you got a new person coming in, and we've talked about this a lot. That leadership piece, what's their style going to be like?
Right.
How are they going to get ingratiated into the project? Learn all the tribal knowledge that the last PM had that he built up over 12 or 13 months, right?
Well, all right. So I get this picture that, regardless of how good the project manager is, their focus is the project. Okay. Within a larger organization, that's what they're there to do. They're there to guide and honcho that thing till it comes to a conclusion. How much does that person need to be cognizant of the greater organization around it and how those two connect? Because I can imagine that at some point you could get really siloed in your efforts to move this project through without really taking any regard in terms of what's happening to the company around you.
That's so vital to the success of any PM. Whether it's true or not, I find it not to be true, but it's certainly a stereotype. A lot of engineers, you'll hear people say, "Oh, put them in the corner, put them in the desk far away, and just let them do their work." Right.
Right.
And, PMs cannot do that. So as you mentioned, as we talked prior, a PM's job is to wrangle the herd, right? Wrangle cats. So it's not just your cats in your department. Right. It could be cross-functional departments. It could be cross-functional departments plus external people like suppliers, right? Or consultants. So a PM absolutely has to be able to pull themselves up 50,000 feet and not only understand what the vision is for the business and why this project exists, but understand how this project supports that vision. And then, going back to my comment earlier about key stakeholders, right? Understanding how to communicate about the project to key stakeholders, and that it's so important. So I see people struggling with that as well, being able to understand kind of the bigger picture of how the project fits in with the organization, its importance, and so forth.
Well, look, I don't, as a course of doing my business, don't necessarily work with project managers, but I work with people who have similar traits in terms of holding people accountable and getting things done, through the team. So I'm wondering if the scope of your resources is not just the people in your department, but you actually have to rely on people in adjacent departments who don't report to you, maybe don't even report up to the people you report up to. What's the secret to getting the working relationship to where those folks will do their part? And so you don't find yourself, kind of stalled because people that are outside your scope aren't responding.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, to get that cross-functional buy-in, you have to know what's important to those key stakeholders and those other departments, right? This is not a situation where you can just come in with an iron fist, right, and say, I need you to do this because X. It's a much more strategic approach that needs to take place, which is, I understand you have a lot on your plate. Here's what's going on with this project. Here's how not only it impacts the organization, but it potentially can impact your department.
So
can you help me
sound,
understand?
all right. So it sounded to me like to go from a good project manager to an exceptional project manager, one of your traits is you got to really be good at managing relationships.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because, I mean, think about it. Within we'll call it a medium-sized organization. Let's say it's, $50 to $100 million, right? So big enough to where it has departments, several dozen employees. Each one of those departments operates like its own little fiefdom, right? So in some companies, and I'm sure you've seen this perhaps with your own customers, those departments act like they're their own little company. They have no idea what's going on.
Yes,
outside.
that does happen.
And I see this all the time. A PM has to be able to break through that and how to bring people together. And I hate to use such a cheesy phrase, but it's kind of for like the common good of the organization, right?
Well, and who knows, maybe a PM might have greater influence in doing that because ultimately they probably don't have the stripes to really force people into compliance. So they've got to work their influence, and maybe it's at a level where other people don't see it as threatening.
Yeah. So we have talked a lot about just because you have a title doesn't mean anything. Right. I think a lot of it comes down to having relationships in place or building on relationships, being a solid professional, one that people trust and respect, that goes a long way. And then the other piece from an influence perspective is hey, how can I help you help me? And then vice versa, right? We need to get this done. What can I do on your end? Do you need anything? Some of the best professionals, it's amazing how they work that in. They'll be like, look, I saw you have that problem over there with that supplier. I know that supplier, actually. I've worked with them on a different project. What if I call John at supplier ABC and I get that resolved for you? If I can do that for you, can you help me with this over here?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
So when you can identify those modes of, I'm going to kind of do a little something that's maybe outside of my big project I'm managing to maybe get this person over here invested in me. Maybe they kind of owe me one at that point. If you can do that and you can do it genuinely, that's the kind of stuff that makes the difference.
Yeah. See, to me, when you were given that example, the first word that came to my head was resourcefulness. You see different ways to address obstacles and keep things moving forward. I think that was a great example. All right. So look, let's do this. Let's kind of get into kind of the final stage of this conversation by just going down our checklist of, let's say you're working with somebody who's been in project management for a reasonable period of time, maybe a year or longer. And they've got the cert behind them, but they're struggling. They're not getting that real A-player results. It sounds to me like here's some of the things they need to really focus in on. They've got to have a strategic understanding of how that project kind of weaves its way into the success of the larger company. They've got to really be good working with other people to be able to get people to do what they need them to do. And they need to be able to communicate really well. What other things would you add to that would basically signal to this person, I've got to focus on that if my performance is going to go up?
We talked earlier about the business strategy or just understanding the bigger picture, right?
Right.
That's very important. One of the things we've not talked about as of yet is being pragmatic, right? Is being able to get something done with perhaps, I'll use the word minimal, but less than necessary resources, right? So for example, if our company has identified this project's going to cost us $1 million,
right,
and I get the project done for $850, guess what? That's going to make a huge wave in the organization and make me look like a badass.
Right.
Versus we budgeted $1 million for the project, and because I couldn't manage my resources appropriately or wasn't proactive with certain things, for example, like materials, because that's a big issue right now. Oh, well, we had a cost run our cost over, and we ended up spending 1.6.
Yeah, and I'm sure in some industries, I know one of my brothers was in the government contracting industry for a lot of years, and that became so bad that for a while it was just considered fashionable that if your project didn't overrun cost wise, you did something wrong. So it's sometimes in particular industry can be really bad.
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a huge believer that if you're going to put something in writing, you should try everything in your power to achieve those results. So one of the things that I would tell people is if you're a PM and you're involved at the early stage of kind of the project planning, right? Overestimate.
Yeah.
If you're that concerned about, God, I'm not sure where we're going to get these resources or these materials, or, like one of the things we'll actually put in our contracts here, and it's clear communication, is that we'll put a 15% buffer in there purposefully, because we want to make sure that our customers don't feel like, we're lowballing them to get the job.
Yes.
And then doing what you see, like you said, with government contracts, which is, hey, we're just going to get the job, so we're going to lowball the shit out of this.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, we're just going to nickel and dime you all the way through, right?
That's where the $1,400 toilet came from.
Right. But you can't really do that internally, because then that ends up making you look bad.
That's right.
So I would say build that into the process, right? And give yourself buffer so that if something does come up, and it always will, that you have a little bit of room to be able to absorb that.
All right, folks, listen, we hope you've really gotten a lot out of this particular discussion today, because I know there's a ton of people out there, especially in certain industries, certainly where we both live. You have medical device, you have bioscience, you have all these other kind of areas which are very technical and require a lot of project management support to get things to market. So if you're in that, or you're thinking about moving in that direction, hopefully some of the things we've talked about today will give you an idea of what you need to really, really be good at if you're going to step into that role and really impress people and get the support you need and be successful with the outcome of whatever project you're handling. So that brings us to the conclusion of the show today. We hope you enjoyed all of these. We not only are doing these podcasts on YouTube now, but we're continuing to have them in audio form on any podcast station that you want to listen to, whether it be iHeart or Spotify or Apple or Google. I mean, there's like dozens of them out there, and we're on all of them. So all you have to do is type in Business Wingmen, and you'll find our platform, and you can go through and look at all the episodes we've had since we started this thing about 1.5 years ago. So we got plenty of material out there, regardless of what kind of profession you're in, to tune yourself up and show up your best you. So Travis, thanks again for a really good discussion today, and we'll see everybody back here next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Take care.